In the summer of 1645, something terrifying moved through these streets. Not soldiers, not fire, not even famine, but the plague. At first, it appears in the records almost quietly. A few burials, a few names, and then suddenly, whole families began disappearing. In St. Stephen's Parish, one father buried 5 children in just 16 days. Another family lost 4 children in a single week. When I first read these entries in the parish register, what struck me wasn't just the scale of death, but how quickly it happened. For centuries, these people survived only as fading lines in old records. A name, a burial date, sometimes only a few words. By piecing together burial registers, baptism records, and documents from Bristol's 1645 outbreak, a more human story starts to emerge. It's not just statistics, not even just plague deaths, but parents, children, households trying to survive as the city around them collapsed. This film follows one small parish in 17th century Bristol and the families who found themselves trapped between epidemic, poverty, and civil war. This is their story. By 1645, Bristol was already under pressure. England was deep in civil war and Bristol had become one of the most important cities in the conflict. Soldiers moved constantly through the streets, ships crowded the harbour, refugees arrived looking for safety. And in conditions like these, disease spread easily. Typhus appeared first, probably carried by the troops stationed inside the city. Then came something worse, the plague. Now, people in the 17th century were familiar with plague outbreaks. Most expected to encounter it at some point in their lives, often every 20 years. But war made outbreaks far more dangerous. Armies carried infection from town to town. Trade routes connected ports to epidemics elsewhere, and Bristol sat directly in the middle of it all. The disease travelled the same way people did, through ships, through markets, through soldiers, through families fleeing infected towns. By the end of the outbreak, about 2,800 people had died across Bristol's surviving parish records. But numbers can flatten tragedies. To understand what this outbreak actually felt like, we need to look much closer. At one parish, one community, one set of families. St. Stephen's Parish sat beside Bristol's busiest waterfront. This was a working neighbourhood. You can almost imagine the noise. Shipbuilders working along the quay, cargo being unloaded and people moving constantly through the narrow streets. Many residents worked close to the harbour itself. We had sailors, joiners, coopers, craftsmen and labourers. And many families lived packed tightly together near the water. That mattered when the plague arrived. Crowded houses made disease harder to escape. And unlike those wealthier families elsewhere in the city, many people here probably couldn't afford to leave. Their work was here, their homes were here, their entire lives were tied to the harbour. So when the infection entered the parish, most had nowhere to go. Almost everything we know about these families survives because of one remarkable source, the parish burial register. As part of this research, I transcribed all 227 burials recorded in St. Stephen's during 1645. 169 were marked with just 2 letters, PL, for plague. That's all. Each entry is painfully short. A name, a child, a wife, a servant, sometimes an occupation, and sometimes a relationship, and sometimes almost nothing at all. When you read the register page by page, you begin to see the outbreak unfolding in real time. The same surnames appearing again and again, multiple burials only days apart. entire households collapsing within weeks. And then another pattern starts to emerge. The children. By comparing burial registers with baptism registers, it became possible to estimate the ages of many of the youngest victims. And what I found was devastating. More than half of all the recorded plague deaths in this parish were children. Again and again, the records return to the very youngest, 1-year-olds, toddlers, small children who barely survived infancy before the plague reached them. Some parents buried several children within days of each other. Reading these entries now 400 years later, there's something almost unbearable about their repetition. Another son buried, another daughter buried, another infant gone. And the register never pauses to grieve. It simply moves to the next name. And sometimes the records allow us to follow one family through the outbreak, almost day by day. In late May 1645, the Huling family began to fall apart. First Mary, and 2 days later, Dorothy, just 7 years old. Then in June, Joseph, aged 11. The next day, John. Then on the same day, Richard. 5 children, gone in just 2 weeks. When you read the register in sequence, the speed of it is shocking. One burial after another. Barely enough time for one funeral before the next child died. Their father, Joseph Huling, appears again and again in the records as his children are buried. We have no account of what he felt, no letters, no diary, no words left behind. But the pattern itself tells a story. This wasn't just an outbreak measured in numbers. For families like the Hulings, it was a devastation unfolding inside a single household. Just weeks later, another family appears in the register, the Prices. They live near the quay at the centre of Bristol's busy waterfront, the kind of place where sailors and merchants, labourers and goods pass constantly through the crowded streets. And in July, the plague reached their home. First Jane, then Joan, aged 7, then Anne, then Robert. 4 children, 9 days. Reading these entries now, it's hard not to imagine the fear inside of that house. Parents watching one child fall sick while another was already dying. Neighbours disappearing. Church bells sounding constantly across the parish. Life continuing beside catastrophe. For families like the Prices, the epidemic must have felt relentless, as though death had entered the house and simply refused to leave. And families like the Hulings and the Prices were not unusual. They were part of a much wider collapse happening across the parish. Out of 122 recorded households, nearly 3/4 lost someone during this outbreak. Many lost more than one person. So when you look across the register as a whole, patterns begin to emerge. The plague moved through closeness, through crowded rooms, through shared beds, through shared doorways, shared workspaces, through the ordinary intimacy of daily life. And in a parish like St Stephen's, dense, busy and tied closely to the waterfront, that made containment almost impossible. The disease spread family to family, house to house, street to street, until grief itself became woven into everyday life. At times, the register reads less like a list of deaths, and more like a community slowly disappearing in front of the clerk writing it down. One of the most unexpected discoveries in this research was who didn't appear in the records. Strange, because children over the age of 9 were almost entirely absent, and that raises difficult questions. Had many of them already left home to work elsewhere? Were some attached to military households during the war? Were their deaths recorded in other parishes? The records never explain. And that's one of the strange things about historical research. Sometimes the most revealing part of the archive is what's missing from it. The plague of 1645 was shaped by war, trade, overcrowding and fear. But in St Stephen's Parish, it becomes intensely personal. What began for me as a study of mortality statistics slowly turned into something else entirely. It's a story about families, about parents trying to endure impossible loss, about children who never reached adulthood, about ordinary people caught in circumstances they could not escape. Today, most of them survive only as brief entries in a burial register, a few words written in fading ink. But 4 centuries later, those names can still be read. And maybe that's one of the most important things history can do. Not simply count the dead, but restore something of the people they once were.